Are British security services to blame for Jihadi John? We now know a lot more about the masked Islamic State militant who's featured in those beheading videos. His name is Mohammed Emwazi from West London. He moved here from Kuwait when he was 6 and studied computing at Westminster University. What we've also heard is claims that he may have been driven to what he's done by his treatment at the hands of British security forces. According to lobby group Cage, he was questioned and harassed by MI5, who also tried to make him an informant. So how did this apparently humble, beautiful young man become one of the world's most wanted? Is there any excuse for what he's done in Syria? Can someone become so radicalized that they turn into a murderous psychopath? You tell me, after the news with Ushma Mystery.
Got something to say? Then say it. Nihal on BBC Asian Network.
Ushma, thank you very much indeed. Are British security services to blame for Jihadi John? We now know this man to be Mohammed Emwazi. He's on the front page of every newspaper this morning with lots of details about his life. The Islamic State militant pictured in the videos of the beheadings of Western hostages is a Kuwaiti-born Briton from West London. But what's also been revealed is details of the difficulties he faced with the security services in the UK. He was known to MI5 for at least 6 years, and they even tried to recruit him as an informer. So is this kind of treatment enough to make someone so radical? Do security services have to accept some responsibility for what he became? Or are there lots of factors at play here, and there's absolutely no excuse for his actions, whatever he has experienced? It's also claimed the harassment he faced from security services made him feel like the victim of injustice, as well as isolated and alienated. Can you empathise with that? Don't the authorities have to use all means possible to keep this country safe? And that means a softly approach just wouldn't work with these people. Or are we just looking to explain away his brutal actions, when really there is no explanation other than that he's a cold-blooded murderer? Do you think the security services could have stopped this if they'd taken a different approach? And then what different approach could they take? So ultimately, I'd like to know from you, do you think that British security services are to blame for Jihadi John? Or do you feel that that is a simple excuse, that it diverts attention away from his friends, his family, and the version of Islam he was sold? And while you say, yes, of course, the harassment could have led to him feeling isolated and alienated in the UK, that is not the same as being willing to cut someone's head off, which is what he seems more than willing to have done on a number of occasions. So, get in contact with me. Tell me what you think. Do you have some sympathy with this argument that the British security services have to accept some responsibility? This young man, Mohammed Emwazi, was willing to leave this country, go to Kuwait, get married, start a life and a family. But the British government stopped him from going. Why? Or would you say, well, he wouldn't have been on MI5's radar if he wasn't a radical or at least had extreme sympathies in the first place? Give me a shout. Tell me what you think about this. Do you think the British security services should take the blame for the man who became Jihadi John? Or do you think that's a ridiculous idea, and that in fact he became radicalised because he had radical sympathies to begin with, and it's perhaps his environment, his neighbourhood, the people that he consorted with that radicalised him, not the British authorities? 81869 is the text number. You can send me a text right now. You can email me right now as well, nihal@bbc.co.uk. Go onto our Facebook page, leave a post for me there, or you can tweet me at BBC Asian Network. But as I always say, it's called the phone-in show for a reason. So here's the phone number.
Call Nihal now on 08459 440 4.
Good morning, it's 12 minutes past 10. You're listening to the phone-in show live on the BBC Asian Network. Get in contact with me this morning and tell me, do you think that British security services are to blame for the radicalisation of Jihadi John, as he was of course known in the newspapers up until Thursday, when an American newspaper revealed that his name was Mohammed Emwazi and he was from West London, Kuwaiti-born, came here when he was 6 years old. He was described as a beautiful young man by the man who runs the organisation CAGE, which is a lobbying organisation helping communities that have been affected by the war on terror. Before we speak to Kerry Bullivant, who is a representative from CAGE, let's speak to Ashgar Bukhari from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee. Good morning, Ashgar.
Good morning.
I don't think any of us would get a prize for guessing that you agree that the security services have to accept responsibility for this. Why?
Well, we don't know if they have to, but it's definitely one angle that we should be looking at. Just like we look at every single angle under the sun when looking at any reason why people take terrorism. If it had been a madrasa, for example, they would have been all over it like a rash. I've heard in the media all day yesterday and today, what university did he go to? What mosque did he go to? What radical preacher spoke to him? So they're looking for absolutely everything. But as soon as you mention the security services or government policy, then all of a sudden, no, it's nothing to do with that. It's just he's a mad guy, which more lends itself more to a cover up or propaganda than it does to real analysis.
Why would he be on the security services radar, do you think, if he didn't have radical sympathies to begin with? And I mean, I'm not talking about just watching him, because there may be, hundreds, if not thousands of people currently being watched, but to the point at which they are actually having meetings with him, they are trying to get him to inform. I mean, that must mean surely that he was a person of considerable interest to them.
Yeah, he clearly was. But here's the real question. The real question isn't, was he a person of interest? The question is, what tips this person of interest, who was going to get married, who had a stable job from all accounts in Kuwait, turning into a complete nutcase? Clearly, partly he must have been nuts in the first place, but did something push him towards that?
So do you find then part of what CAGE was saying yesterday slightly disingenuous, because they seem to be putting the blame almost entirely on the security services and saying that it was them that radicalised him, whereas you are clearly pointing out that he was quite possibly radicalised, or, as you said, a nut job to begin with?
No, I don't think they were saying that.
Really?
No, I don't think they were. I think they were saying very simply that one of the factors that definitely need to be looked at was that the security service actions. At the end of the day, they
okay. Just to be very clear, on their website it says Jihadi John : radicalised by Britain.
Yes, and there's no doubt about it that it was radicalised by Britain foreign policy, and clearly one of the areas that the secondary area is
not radicalised by an extreme form of Islam that was sold to him that perverted the very central tenets of Islam to suit a political ideology, which is going to be destructive regardless of foreign policy.
Well, I've heard this argument a million times. Well,
I've heard yours a million times as well. That's why I put the point to you.
You're asking me again, so I'll answer.
Go on.
It, right? So you can hear it 1 million and one time. And this is a 1 million one time. I'll say it for those of your viewers who haven't heard it. It's simple as this. All the terrorists that have been arrested or have made videos after they've committed their terrorist attack and died in the process have said that the reason why they carry out these acts is due to government foreign policy destroying the Muslim world. Any community in the history of this world that have been attacked by an outside force, whether that be blacks, whether that be Indians, or whether that be whites, have taken to violence, whether that means women. Women in this country tried to blow up Parliament. The suffragettes tried to blow up Parliament because they felt they weren't getting the vote. And a massive difference in that and getting a civilization like Iraq, Palestine, and all the rest of it wiped off the face of the earth. So the fact of the matter is, violence is.
But this violence was happening. I mean, look, the attacks, as you well know, on the Nairobi embassy happened in '98. This was pre the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, wasn't it? So this has been happening for some time. Now, yes, of course, you could argue, as I'm sure you're going to, that American foreign policy predates that. That's why it happened. But these people are violent psychopaths who are looking for an excuse to destroy civilian lives and put suicide bombers in the middle of markets, destabilise areas, because they succeed on chaos, don't they? They feed on anarchy and chaos.
Sure, they do. But the question still goes back to what makes a violent psychopath? Why they weren't violent psychopaths before the Muslim world was destroyed? What made them?
The Muslim world hasn't been destroyed. Wait a minute. Muslims are more than happy to tell us all constantly that it's the fastest growing religion in the world. So clearly, it hasn't been destroyed.
No, that's a faith, and there's a difference between a geographical area and the people. I disagree that it's the fastest growing religion in the world, but okay, there you go, right? The fact of the matter is you can't deny, whether you like to or not, the fact that Palestine is currently being ethnically cleansed, Iraq completely destroyed, 1 million people dead, Afghanistan in tatters, Pakistan in almost a civil war, popped up dictators from Egypt to Uzbekistan. Stop no, there's nothing wrong, everything's fine, the sun is shining. Muslims don't believe it. Muslims are taking to violence due to it. So we're either, going to talk about fairy stories, or we're going to talk about facts on the ground. The facts on the ground are our policies are creating terrorists. If we want to stop terrorism, stop the propaganda, and actually face up to the facts and say, what do we need to do to stop this?
Okay, thank you very much, Ashkar. Let's speak to Dr. Rizwan Sabir, who's Assistant Professor in Counter-Terrorism and Counterinsurgency at Edge Hill University. We've got Gurpreet on the line from Leicester, and also Kerry Bullivant from Cage. Dr. Sabir, good morning.
Morning.
You hear Ashkar Bukhari and his ilk's arguments constantly, I'm sure, that it all comes down to British, American, Western foreign policy. What is the counter-argument to that?
The counter-argument is that this is primarily driven either through religious doctrine or ideology. And of course, ideology is only useful when there is a conducive political environment. Otherwise, you're just dealing with a set of different ideas and viewpoints. You need to put those ideas into practice. And for that, you need to have what is perceived to be an unfair or an unjust or a particular political reality.
So is this essentially what you're saying is this is a violent ideology looking for a cause as opposed to...
No. You asked me what the counter-argument to Ashkar Bukhari's point was, and I'm telling you what that is. That's not my argument.
Right, but that's essentially what you're saying, isn't it? That it's a violent ideology that needs a cause in order to breathe life into it.
Yes, I am saying that people will make the argument, that people do make the argument that this is not a political issue here. This is a religiously motivated, ideologically driven, nihilistic, irrational movement that believes in violence for the sake of violence.
And as an academic who has looked at this from both sides, which side do you feel, and I'm sorry to make this simplistic, but what side do you feel has the most credence? Which argument do you feel statistically or academically plays out better?
As academics, we believe in the concept of falsification and relying on empirical evidence. That is evidence that can be either observed or analysed or examined. Now, what the evidence suggests is that there is no correlation. A correlation is not the same as causation. What that basically means is that though something may seem to be connected, it's not necessarily the cause of it. So yes, you could make an argument that there is a correlation between somebody like Mohammed Emwazi, who goes and beheads and does all these acts of violence, to an ideology. But that's not the same as causation. That's not what's causing his actions. He may justify his actions in the name of a particular doctrine or an ideology, etc. But that's not necessarily what's driven him to pick that knife up and to basically use it on somebody's neck or whichever form of violence you're taking. So and this is a slight misunderstanding as well, that everybody equates correlation with causation. We need to distinguish between those two. Now, when you ask what the evidence says, the evidence quite clearly says that there are a number of different contributing factors to this somewhat redundant, non-meaningful term called radicalization, because radicalization is a term, one, that is used to describe a process that nobody really actually understands. Hence why, after more than a decade of counter-terrorism and since the attacks of 9/11, we're still having this discussion today. What is causing these individuals to go on and become involved in acts of violence? And what you have to remember is that there's a number of different contributing factors, and they can be summarized into 4 points: socio-economic, political, and ideological. Now, like I said, ideological is only one argument that is only given some kind of sanctity when it is met with what is perceived to be an unjust or an unfair political reality. Now, in this specific case of Mohammed Emwazi, aka Jihadi John, what you find is that the political reality that he was faced with didn't necessarily cause him to undertake the violence. At the end of the day, he is an individual rational actor that is responsible for his own actions. But what happens is that when you face injustice, or what you perceive to be injustice, then you recognize within your own mind that the only way that you can fight that injustice is more directly. Now, initially, and these are very early reports, that he was trying to pursue through official channels in the UK, the Independent Police Complaints Commission, etc. He was going through the Kuwaiti embassy in order to understand what was happening with his visa. But what essentially this shows is that this individual was initially pursuing things through official systems of accountability, and failing in that process and encountering the challenges and difficulties at the same time from the security services, which perpetuate feelings of alienation because there is no recourse to accountability. So what happens is that those feelings are perpetuated, and the only way that you can really feel like you are fighting back is to basically fight back violently in a lot of these cases. So what you find is that from going from a normal individual through to somebody who's fighting through the system, then becomes involved in thinking, actually, the system is not working for me, and the only way to therefore challenge the system is to directly confront it through violence. Now,
can I interrupt you just for a second? Sorry, Dr. Sabir, I just want to ask you, would someone like him be on the securities authorities' radar if he hadn't been expressing views? And I'm not talking about just being under surveillance, but to the point at which they are having meetings with him, they're trying to get him to become an informant. Would he be anywhere near to that if he hadn't expressed views, extreme views, to begin with?
You don't have to express extreme views in order to come onto the radar of the security services. And the whole reason for that is that when you are being approached or being monitored, when you are expressing extreme views, the security services would argue that the process of radicalization has already started, hence why you are expressing extreme or radical views. So it goes back a lot further than that. And what the security services and the security apparatus essentially do is they use indicators to assess whether somebody is a terrorist or not. What are those indicators? One of those indicators would be the involvement in political protest, in speaking out against certain governments and their actions. I'm talking specifically here about Palestine and the Palestinian conflict and the conflict with Israel. These kind of things would be used to assess whether somebody has a potential to become involved in acts of violence. So what the security services are essentially trying to do is nip terrorism in the bud. Now, when you are trying to nip something in the bud, that is terrorism before it's happened, violence before it's happened, you've left the domain of evidence and you've entered the domain of speculation and perception. And as you will know, our perceptions and our speculations are based upon our socialization. And our socializations, to a great extent, are based on our fears, our paranoia, and our prejudices. So what you find, therefore, is that a lot of innocent people find themselves being put onto a radar in which they are perceived to be potential terrorists, and that therefore prompts the security apparatus of the UK to inflict some kind of monitoring on them, and that therefore perpetuates and creates what they say is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you are going to call me a terrorist and treat me like a terrorist, then you start behaving like you are a terrorist because it's constantly being imposed upon you.
Which would be a bizarre, I guess would be a bizarre course of action. It's almost as if the police ring up a bank robber and say, we know you're about to rob a bank, and then you go and rob a bank knowing that you're under surveillance.
Well, I mean, this is usually how power works. Is that power symbolically they accuse you of being something. They represent images of you constantly, of you being in a particular way, and then what individuals find themselves doing is they end up complying with those images because they are constantly being told that you are X, Y, or Z. So it is an extremely. I mean, now we're talking about theoretically about power, right? And we're not going to get into a lecture format or an academic discussion about this.
No, we're not. It becomes all far too abstract. But it's interesting because, of course, you say on the radar, but my question initially to you was much more specific than that, because it was actually about the kind of processes that he is supposed to have gone through. Now, there is, of course, a difference between being on the radar in a kind of much more general sense and being the very specific meetings that he had, trying to turn him into an informant. So there is a level, presumably, there are different types of stages that you would go through from the security services. Maybe they have a green, amber and red kind of system, I'm not sure, but presumably he must have been quite worrying to the security services.
If you are known to be associating with individuals that the security services have some kind of interest in. Now, the trip in Tanzania that Mohammed Emwazi attempted to undertake,
the safari, quote unquote, right. Yes.
Well, yeah. At the moment, we don't have the evidence, so we have to presume it was a safari, unless proven otherwise. And this is why a court case is so important, because we need to see the evidence, right? But yeah, okay. If he was going over on this so-called safari, and the intelligence services believe that he was involved in something sinister, the point is, one, we've not seen the evidence for that, and two, we know of other cases where the security services presume or assume somebody is going to a foreign land in order to become involved in violence. And if they presume, based on their own intelligence, and that intelligence, I'm sure, will be inaccurate and questionable in many senses, we can't verify that intelligence independently. So we have to take the intelligence services' word for it, right? And that is that that he was going to Tanzania, and therefore he posed some kind of military threat in that region of the world. Therefore, we denied him entry. Now, the problem is, if you are presumed to be going there for fighting, then and you are known to hang out with known individuals who have interest, then you become of interest to the security services yourself. And the problem here is that whilst it is not improper for the security services to try to recruit informants, what needs to happen is some kind of investigation to ensure that the methods that are being used by the security services are within the law and they are appropriate. Because what we seem to be finding from this case, and also the case of another famous case, Michael Adebalaji, the Woolwich attacker, is that if the security services are going in trying to turn or recruit these individuals, and that is perpetuating their grievances, then I think the intelligence services need to sit back down, go back to the drawing board, and reassess their own strategy on how they are actually undertaking their operations and what kind of approaches that they are using. And unless we do that, then I think you could make the argument that people will still feel quite disenchanted with the policies and the practices of the law enforcement and intelligence agencies, which may therefore perpetuate the conflict even further.
Okay, Dr. Sabir, thank you very much indeed for your illuminating comments on this. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Do you think that the security services are to blame for the radicalisation of Jihadi John? Now let's speak to Kerry Bullivant, a representative from CAGE, which is an advocacy group which helps communities that are impacted by the war on terror. Kerry, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Sorry to have kept you waiting for so long, but I'm sure you were interested by what Dr. Rizwan Sabir had to say, as well as what Ashghar Bukhari had to say.
I think they both made some very, very interesting points.
Now, your organisation has come in for quite a lot of flack in the press this morning.
Yes.
About what you said yesterday about this man. And even Ashghar Bukhari pointed out, contrary to what Hassan Qureshi said from CAGE yesterday, that this man probably was a radicalised extremist. Therefore, he got onto the radar of MI5 in the first place. So isn't it just a bit simplistic to say that it was the security services that were to blame?
Well, I think there's a couple of points here. You sort of indicated quite a few times that, look, if he wasn't a threat, then the security services wouldn't be interested in him.
Yes.
They wouldn't be taking this much scrutiny on him. Now, I'm going to sort of bring it back to my case a little bit here and what happened to me. I was put under a control order. I was put under actually much stricter scrutiny than this guy was. And in terms of security level threat analysis, I would have been higher in the sense that I was put under house arrest. I had my passport taken away from me. I couldn't even leave the house without phoning the police to let them know I was going. I had to phone them when I returned. So I was under much more scrutiny, but yet when a judge finally saw it after 2.5 years, he said there were no grounds to ever have done that. Now, this is a case where they only have to prove reasonable grounds for suspicion. That's the same burden of proof you need to do a stop and a search on the street. They couldn't even prove there were grounds to suspect I'd done anything wrong. We're not talking beyond reasonable doubt, like 99% sure. We're talking stop and search.
So who was in your social circle?
Evidence.
What mosque were you going to? What meetings were you going to? What demonstrations were you going to, Kerry? I mean, clearly, I'm sure some of our listeners would find it very difficult to believe that just out of nowhere they decided, you know what, I don't like the sound of his name, let's go and harass him for 2.5 years.
The point is that the people who saw the secret evidence was the judge. And the judge was the one who said there were no grounds for suspicion. I'll tell you what some of the secret...
So the British legal system helped you?
I'll tell you what some of the secret evidence that we found out that was used in my case was. There was a phone call made by a friend of my mother's who was a non-Muslim, because I'm a convert, so my mother was a non-Muslim, her friends. One of them got drunk one night and thought to herself, why has Christine's son become a Muslim? He's 21 and he's become a Muslim. He must have been brainwashed by Al-Qaeda. And she phoned up the anti-terror hotline and made an anonymous tip-off. When we found out about that through our own investigations, and when we went to court, we counted them on this and we said, look, is this part of your secret evidence? They said yes. That's part of the secret evidence. The evidence that we're not even going to that we wouldn't even tell you about unless you found out for yourself. Fine. Did you go and talk to her? No. Did you find out why she made that accusation? No. Now, you're a journalist. You know about fact-checking. If you're going to put a story out there, you go and you check what you're saying. If you know that nobody is going to check up on your story, the pressure on you to do that becomes a lot less because there's no accountability, there's no due process, and that's what this all comes down to.
But Kerry, but what's interesting about your own story, and I think what is stark about it, is you went through the British legal system, and in the end, a British judge, part of the establishment, said it is unlawful what the security services are doing. And you went back to your life, and now you lobby on behalf of people like you who are wrongly harassed by the British government. What you didn't go and do was chop the heads off people, which does strike you, I'm sure, as an extreme, radical, psychopathic act. And therefore, there is a great difference between you and this man, Mohammed Emwazi.
I say to that there, but for the grace of God. I tell you this. Justice must not just be done, it must be seen to be done. Because if people do not have the perception that they will receive justice, then they will be forced into actions which they would not otherwise take. So, for example, when I was on my control order, I wasn't even told what the allegations were against me. Not even the allegations, let alone the evidence for those allegations. I was told that I would have a secret trial and I wouldn't be even able to defend myself properly. The control order was being extended year upon year in a secret hearing with the Home Office, and I had no involvement in that. I saw no way of clearing my name.
But you would have been a perfect example.
Let me just make this point because it's very important to that point you made about the case and the differences. After a year and a half of seeing no way of getting any justice, I absconded. I went on the run. There was a massive manhunt. It was on the front pages of all the newspapers, just like Jihadi John is today. There was talk of me in Parliament and on the news where they said don't approach him because he could be armed and dangerous. We're talking full prison break stuff here. The fact of the matter is, I took that action because I saw no way of getting justice.
So, and when you were caught, or did you hand yourself in? Did you hand yourself in, or were you caught?
I handed myself in after 5 weeks.
Right, okay. And were you imprisoned?
I was.
And
I was found innocent.
Right, okay. And how long were you in prison for?
6 months.
And when you came out, and you... Is that the point at which a judge then said to the security services that they should stop harassing you? This is the irony of this whole situation. And I just want to make one very quick point. There was a moment where I was in hiding. And there was a moment where basically there was a choice. I lived the rest of my life on the run. I go and get out of here. Yeah, I try and take back my freedom by direct action. Yeah, illegal but direct. Yeah, or I come back and I take my chances with the court. I chose the latter. That was a split-second decision in a moment of stress, under unimaginable pressure, in hiding. But Kerry, this is the... Wait, I've given you plenty of time to talk. I want you to come back to this point that I keep making, which is that you weren't a psychopath to begin with.
No, but the actual decision to go on the run, and the decision...
Out of fear, and out of frustration, and out of anger, and I'm sure many people listening can understand that, because you were innocent. You hadn't done anything wrong. But
those are the emotions that can lead people into situations. The other people that I was on the run with...
You say it as if he takes glee in cutting people's heads off with his own hands.
I'm not defending what he did.
No, I know you're not. But what I'm saying is that the difference is that you're arguing, and your organisation is arguing, is that the British state, the authorities, have to take blame for what this man became. But you are living evidence of a choice. He made a choice to become a murderous psychopath. Now, that choice is a choice you did not make. Therefore, regardless of the process to a certain extent, he made a choice. Therefore, trying to give him a get out of, well, not a get out of jail card free, but try and say, well, look, we've got to understand why he became this. People are arguing is you're an apologist for this kind of behaviour.
Look, it's not being an apologist for it. Everybody should stand accountable for their own actions. And that means that anybody who kills people for unjustified reasons needs to be held to account. Anybody who commits torture. And we say that of the people who torture in Guantanamo and the people who murder in any other theatre in the world. Yeah? Everybody needs to be held to the same standard of law. There's a very important point here. And you said that I wasn't a psychopath, I wasn't a nutter. My best friend wasn't a psychopath or a nutter. He ended up getting killed by a drone in Pakistan because he went on the run. This is the fact of the matter is here, yeah, that these situations can push you into extraordinary circumstances that wouldn't have matched your earlier character. I'm sure if we can bring back Dr. Rizwan, if he's here, he'll be able to give you probably a more academic explanation of this. I just want to say one point on Woolwich and Adabalajo. He also came to our office and also sought our help. He sought our help when MI6 went to him and said, you have to work for us, otherwise your brother in Saudi Arabia will be tortured. He was in tears in our office.
So is that an admittance to a certain extent that you failed as well? Because if someone like that comes in tears to you, and then sometime later he's on the streets of London soaked in the blood of drummer Lee Rigby, then where did you fail?
I tell you where we failed. We failed because we couldn't get him due process. We couldn't get him the rights that were needed at that stage, which could have averted the horrible murder that he went on to commit.
Nihal, if I can just jump into this,
Dr. Sabir,
if you don't mind, just on your point about accountability and Kerry's case proving that there is recourse in the current, criminal justice system to declare your innocence, etc. I think it was an extremely valid point that you make. That of course, Kerry's case does show how you can bring accountability through the existing system. But I think what's important to note is that this is an exception to the rule, not the rule itself. Kerry is clearly a very articulate individual. I don't mean to sound patronising when I say that. He's clearly well informed about these things, and he also had an extremely powerful infrastructure that was helping him bring accountability. And he has not gone into that, but I know that Gareth Peirce, one of the most infamous human rights lawyers known to this land ever, represented Kerry, and I know that Liberty, the human rights organisation, were also involved in helping Kerry bring some kind of accountability and justice for his, or vindication for his name. So you have to recognise that most of the individuals that are being detained, questioned, interrogated under anti-terrorism powers are not as articulate as Kerry is, and they don't have the infrastructure or the networks that can offer the support that is absolutely required in order to bring accountability. So when we say there is recourse for accountability in the system as it stands, yes, there is some space to manoeuvre, but I think it's also very important to recognise that the individuals that are largely targeted under the anti-terrorism powers don't usually have the networks or indeed the ability within themselves or the strength to fight the injustices that they are faced with. So Kerry's case is an anomaly. It's not the rule.
Sorry,
no, actually, Kerry, 1 second. I mean, I've got Gurpreet in Leicester to speak to. Kerry, sorry, and who's been waiting a while, and Safraz in Leicester as well. 81869 on the text, or you can call us on 08459 440 445. Gurpreet, good morning.
Good morning.
What do you think, sir?
Valid points from each individual that's been online so far. I think my views are my views, and this is how I feel. I think there is a lot of accountability that CIA, the MI6, the MI5 need to take, and it needs to come out at some point, because I mean, when your guys called me back, I was trying to state the fact that a couple of days ago you had a caller online which was trying to say the same kind of thing, you know, the other day, where you know, don't take this the wrong way, Nihal, but you were basically trying to get him to prove where is it and how can he be saying that these guys, the CIA, the MI6, have made these ISIL groups, you know, Bin Laden, you know, went after Saddam, you know, for their own reasons, for power. And today we're having a discussion on it, which I'm glad. And, you know, in Kerry's case, you know, he had the support. He had people there telling him, no, come on, you know, you're better than that, possibly, and taking him on the right path. You know, but others aren't that lucky, unfortunately, when they're in that situation. Some people make the wrong decisions, and they have to live with that. So my views are that, yes, they are accountable, and they should be held accountable for these kind of recruitment processes that they tend to go through, which is really, really, really harsh.
Gurpreet, thank you very much. Safraz is in Leicester. Good morning, Safraz.
Hi there, morning, Nihal.
Are they to blame, the security services, for Jihadi John?
Do you know what? I'm coming on the show with my own personal experience of travelling through the airport with a very large group of my family. We were travelling to Spain last year, and basically what happened was we've got toddlers, we've got grandparents, we've got kids, we've got everything kicking about. And one of my little sisters, after going through the security checks in the airport, picks up a leaflet that's lying on the table which says information about Syria. And as soon as she picks it up, she's approached by two uniformed individuals in suits. And she was questioned for at least an hour and a half, and they were ready for her to miss her flight, for her to be left behind from her family, everybody else. And she's under 16, right? And that was only an hour and a half of our life, where it was quite a scary moment where we don't know where they've taken our sister, we don't know what's going on. And she was pulled up because she picked up a leaflet on Syria. And she came back and she was questioned and grilled about everything under the sun. And that was only an hour and a half of our life. Whereas the people that are targeted, this was Frontline that approached us. The people that are targeted, they're going through this on a more severe level. I mean, my background, my family came from the time where Idi Amin kicked everybody out. And they've seen horrific things in their lives. But the thing is, this was a scary moment that stuck with us for a very, very long time. And that was an hour and a half, which is unbelievable. So people like
I see what you mean. So if you take the fear that you guys felt and then multiply it by hundreds of times, then you can kind of get an idea of how some of these people will feel. I mean, Safraz, a lot of people argue, though, no smoke without fire, and the security services, they have to be so much more forensic than us, because ultimately they are there to stop us from going through what happened on 7/7 and what happened in 9/11, and since then they have stopped many more 7/7s from happening, haven't they?
No, that's good, but what you call is a 15-year-old travelling with 3 toddlers, grandparents, travelling to Spain, dressed in flip-flops and earrings dangling, and is that really somebody that's a target?
Well, a 315... Wait a minute. Just as we found out in the last week, are 3 15-year-old girls with great educations and come from loving families, should they be targets? Should we be looking at them? Well, when we don't, they end up crossing the border into Syria, which is what we've seen.
Wasn't there already information on them that their school friends knew about and stuff like that?
One of their school friends in December travelled to Syria, yes, and they were questioned, and they seemed perfectly innocent, and nothing was going to happen to them, and then... Yet 3 months later, they themselves make the same journey.
There's still a difference from them travelling on their own and a girl that's traveling.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I
traveling to Spain, to Alicante.
Yes, of course I get what you're saying, Safraz, and I can imagine that was a terrifying experience for you and your family, and most of all for your 15-year-old sister, who probably didn't have an idea what was going on. And also, Safraz, it does buy into something that my friends have told me many times before, which is, as a Muslim, you can't even have, or the feeling is, I can't have views about what's going on in the world, about what I see as injustice in the world, without feeling a bit paranoid that someone might be listening. And
there is. I mean, I'm going back 15 years ago when me and my friends used to joke about, they used to be standing outside the mosque, and we used to joke about the Prime Minister wants to put microphones into lampposts. Don't talk to near the lamppost. You know what I mean? And we used to joke about that kind of thing. The paranoia is there. People don't want to express views of even the basic rules of their religion.
Safraz, you would accept, wouldn't you, that there is a long journey between being harassed, as Kerry Bullivant was, who went through the legal system, and a judge eventually said that the security services should leave him the hell alone. There's a big jump between that and being able to hold another human being's head in your hands after you've cut it off.
There is a big jump, but at the end of the day, we don't know how much pressure is being put on a person. Everybody has a different breaking point. And like the individuals on the phone, on the show just before me, who made that split-second decision to hand himself in, he made a decision that he felt was right at that time. And who knows, if he didn't have that opportunity, if he had more pressure on him, if he was stuck in that system for another 5 weeks, who knows where he would have been.
All right, Safraz, thank you. I want to bring Dr. Rizwan Sabir back in, Assistant Professor in Counter-Terrorism, Counterinsurgency at Edge Hill University, to ask him a very practical question, which is, what can the security services do? I mean, as the IRA once chillingly said, you have to be lucky all the time. We only have to be lucky once. And that, of course, means that the net has to be wide. They have to take any little thing that is said, including the friend of someone's mother saying, I think he's become a Muslim because he's joined Al-Qaeda. They have to take all of these things seriously, don't they?
That's a very, very good question. The security services do not operate in a vacuum. They are there to serve, and they take their orders from politicians. So ultimately what you find is that they are involved in methods that will stop and reduce the risk of violence. Ultimately, the security services have to. This is a political issue, not one that's largely revolving around what laws we need or what interception powers we have or want. So I think we need to distinguish between the methodology used to stop violence or reduce it, and also what will lead to a lasting solution. Now, you mentioned the example of the IRA, and in a way I'm very glad that you did, because it makes my point for me. And that is that was ultimately a political settlement that resolved the conflict.
But that's because you had someone to negotiate with. As you're well aware, you don't have. It's not the same organisation, is it? Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, and also as well, they're not interested in negotiation, are they? I mean, that's...
Well, that's you see, that argument that you've just said, that they're not interested in negotiation, is based on an assumption that the opponent in this case is irrational and beyond belief. And what does that lead to? What does that mean? It means when you declare your opponent to be involved in violence for the sake of violence, you decontextualize the opponent's violence, and what you ultimately say is...
But what they want is not acceptable to huge parts of the world.
But hang on, what you imply is when you decontextualize or represent the opponent as being irrational and nihilistic is that you say we can't talk to these people, therefore fighting endless war is the only option or the only solution. Now, when you
they're not arguing to fight an endless war, are they? They're arguing to destroy them, and that's what various governments in the Middle East want to happen, and their destabilizing effect, the fact that they have no truck with anyone who is of a different faith of them, therefore anyone of a different faith cannot live in the regions that they control, means that it's very difficult to find a point at which you can negotiate with them. I mean, you
do have to break the movement down. It's not a homogenous block. Political Islamic movements, violent.
Well, I'm talking about ISIS specifically.
Okay, ISIS. You see, ISIS is a phenomenon.
Actually, do you know what? I want to get back because you didn't actually answer my question. What is it that the security services can do differently to what they're doing now? You kind of slightly dodged it by talking about politicians.
No, I'm not dodging.
Because I want to know. You said that they're not doing what they should be doing, but yet...
No, the security services are doing what they should be doing.
Okay,
they are intercepting communications. They are trying to recruit informants. They are operating within their remit, and in fact, on a lot of occasions, they are operating outside of it, involved in extrajudicial actions, such as being complicit in torture. And we know that's been proven now from the CIA leaks that have come out and the CIA torture report, right? So they are doing everything that they can. But I'm saying that in order to find a solution to this problem, we have to recognize that this is ultimately a political issue. And for that reason, will require a political settlement. And the only people that are able and have the ability and the means to do that are the political classes. And until the political classes, because the intelligence services operate on what the politicians...
Well, they're not going to give them less powers, are they, necessarily?
No, but we're talking about... No, the powers are enough anyway. You know, we in the UK...
But we're talking about radicalisation, that they are part of the problem, that the security services... the way that they carry about their business forms part of the radicalisation of these young people. That's what Cage is arguing, and that's what others are arguing. And yet, how do you do it differently? Because if you're arguing, as you have done, that they are doing exactly what they should be doing, then where does this stop?
Well,
it's just this circle.
Every tactic that the security services use has to fulfill a strategic objective. Now, if the strategic objective is to stop political violence and the threat to the UK from manifesting itself violently,
yes,
then you could say that the methods being used by the security services are counterproductive. And the reason they are counterproductive... Right,
so what's the alternative then?
Hang on, if they are counterproductive, then that is perpetuating the conflict. And the alternative is that there needs to be, like Kerry Bullivant from Cade said, justice needs to be seen to be done. And for that reason, what needs to happen is...
This is a very vague answer, Dr. Sabir, because I'm sorry, but, you know, you're dealing with specifics of how intelligence services deal with these individuals. Now then you argue it's counterproductive. Then I ask you, what's the alternative?
It's an investigation. We need to investigate what is actually happening in Thames House and in the field where MI5 operatives are operating.
Right. Okay, but we know that because wait a minute, but we know what they're doing because, of course, we've got people like Kerry Bullivant who'll tell us because they've been through it. So what alternative can they be doing to protect us from these psychopathic individuals who would wish to blow up themselves on buses and on tube trains? You know, what are the alternatives for the security services other than the surveillance, other than taking threats seriously, other than making sure that people who consort with radicals with radical ideas, people who went to meetings by Omar Bakri Mohammed, what can they do?
Well, this is what I'm telling you. What they are doing... hold on. What they are doing is they are undertaking actions that they have been given the power to do. And they are doing that with some element of autonomy and freedom, right? Ultimately, they are responsible to the politicians.
Yeah, okay, we get that.
What I'm saying is what needs to happen on the ground is that they need to be... No one knows what they're actually doing. All we have is snippets of information from people like Kerry Bullivant to say that this is what happened to me. And
what happened to Michael Adebayo? And what happened to Mohammed? So we do have a picture. I mean, we can certainly... I mean, someone like you're an expert in it. If you don't know what they're doing, then what? Then...
Now, we have random snippets of information. There is no official kind of inquiry that has been undertaken into the operations of the security services.
So what are your suggestions? What is your suggestions? As a counter-terrorism, as a professor in counter-terrorism, what would if you were put in front of a government committee and said, right, how can we be doing this differently? What would you suggest practically?
I would say we need to ensure that the actions being undertaken by the security services are appropriate and proportionate, right? And because in this case, what's happened is it seems that the intelligence services have been involved in disproportionate action, which has perpetuated grievances and led an individual...
But what if their argument is that... Wait a minute. If they argue then that some of those actions resulted in, as we know, the security services preventing terrorists from committing these heinous crimes on British soil, then what's your counter-argument to it?
Well, we don't know what's prevented an act of terrorism from happening because an individual hasn't committed a crime. So how are you measuring that?
Well, I guess we have to trust the fact that people aren't lying dead on the streets of London and Manchester and Leeds because they prevented it from happening.
As a journalist who believes in verification of what a source tells you, you know as well as me that can't be independent.
So but you see, this is the rock and the hard place that they find themselves in, because of course the security services are entrusted with stopping these individuals from carrying out these crimes. When they do stop them from doing, then what do we have to ask them? Can we see the manual? Can we see what you did to make sure that this happened?
Because they wouldn't tell you, they wouldn't give you the manual, because they would argue that would undermine operational ability.
And you would agree with that, wouldn't you, I guess, for security reasons? Because, of course, if you tell them how you do it, then, of course, the terrorists can use that to try and get round it.
Yes, let me just make my point now, right? Yes, they would not give you the manual. 2, I would like to see the manual in order to verify what they're saying. And 3, this is why an independent inquiry is absolutely fundamental in order to ensure that we can have some kind of accountability and knowledge about the security services activities. Until we know what they are doing, how they are doing it, and when they are doing it, how are we ever supposed to verify what they are telling us?
But some things, do we not have to just trust the fact that some things have to remain secret in order to preserve the security, the freedoms?
Nobody's denying that, but if you look at
you are.
No, I'm not denying
You're asking to see the manual.
Well, I would like to see the manual because I would like to see what they are doing and how they are doing it.
And they would argue that you can't see it and you can't do it because, of course, that would then give the terrorists exactly the means to bypass what we're doing.
Well, that's you implying that I would share that information with.
Well, I mean, they can't guarantee that you could keep it secure, but that's another argument. Dr. Sabir, we've run out of time, unfortunately, but thank you for joining us today. I'm sure the security services, if they're listening, may think that we can't know everything. In the first hour, we were talking about whether you felt that the security services were to blame for the radicalisation of Jihadi John. That is what CAGE, which is an advocacy group that helps communities that have been affected or impacted by the war on terror, believe. And they have been roundly accused of being apologists for ISIS, unfairly. But what point were they trying to make? They say that the man in question, Mohammed Emwazi, a 26-year-old Kuwaiti-born Briton, was essentially put onto a path of radicalisation by the harassment he suffered at the hands of the security services. But then, of course, we heard from Kerry Bullivant, who is from CAGE, who went through the same harassment. He, with the help of other organisations, went the legal route, and a judge told the security services to stop harassing him and leave him alone. He has then since become an advocate for people who've been through the same process as him. But when I asked the professor about this, what were the alternatives, Professor Rizwan Sabir, Dr. Rizwan Sabir, Assistant Professor in Counter-Terrorism and Insurgency at Edge Hill University, he didn't seem to have much of an answer to what the alternative is to keeping surveillance. And in fact, he admitted that the security services are doing exactly what they should do, but then insinuated that that might be counterproductive, but then had no alternative. He also wanted to see the manual that the security services may use, and of course I use the term manual. He wanted to know the procedures that the security services use in order to capture genuine terrorists and stop them from committing the kind of crimes that we saw happen on the streets of London in 7/7. But then, of course, why would the security services do that? Why would they tell us the methods that they use? How could they be sure that the information that they gave to Dr. Rizwan Sabir didn't somehow, not through his doing, but make its way into the public space? Therefore, of course, the terrorists would know the methods that the security services are using in order to catch them. So, we kind of went round in circles a little bit in the first hour. Swapan is in East London and called in. After that, we have Abu Isa, we have Amrik, and we have Fahad Hussein to speak to me about this. Swapan, good afternoon.
It's okay, yeah?
Yes.
Good morning. Good afternoon. What I'm saying is this Jihadi John, this wicked man who beheading people, he should take he's the wicked person, and we shouldn't blame the security service for detaining him when he was, and the MI5 was questioned him when he was travel to Tanzania with other two people. And the security service MI5 wanted to recruit him. You probably know the story. So he had some sort of obsession with the Somalia's Al-Shabaab, which was reported in the previously. So he has influence from the at the place he was working at Syria as a guard, prison guard. Captive said that he was watching the video, so he had some training there to be Jihadi John. So security service doing their job, detaining and questioning like MI5.
So can I just because I've got to move on, but so just to be clear, you feel that the security services were just doing their job?
Because they have to protect the general public in this country.
Yes, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you. I agree with that. They have to, of course, protect us in this country. Abu Isa called in. Very good afternoon to you, Abu.
Good afternoon. I don't know what that guy was talking about. I think he hasn't got a clue what he's talking about, to be honest with you.
Okay, mate. Well, let's hear what you have to say then.
Right. My personal experience back in 2011 when I came back to the UK, I went on a 2-week holiday to Pakistan with my family. But my family had gone before. My child, he fell and he fractured his skull, so I had to go and bring them over. As I entered back into Birmingham, so I was approached by the passport control and said, look, we need to hold you for a few minutes.
Right.
Took me to an office where two gentlemen were suited up and they started talking to me saying that we know about you and we need to talk. And I said, look, I haven't got the time of day. My child is ill. I need to go home. Took my details. And from then we had a number of meetings which on their agenda was, we'll recruit you to be a spy in the community. There's a number of people that you know. And you were an influential person because I used to work on a local radio station there. And my influence, they believed, was quite immense on the community. And so we can use you as a tool to spy and work with us. I said, no, I will not work with you. However, if I found anyone doing anything wrong, then I would firstly approach them myself and try to resolve the matter as opposed to passing them your way. What happened then was a series of pushed and shoved to join their team, constant calling, and they were stupid because they didn't know I was recording every single call of theirs. And I said to them at the end, if you continue to harass me, then I will go on radio and I will play all these recordings, which they wrapped up. But I have friends around, local, decent people. They've also been approached, some have been harassed. So we have to look at foreign policy as well. Iraq, weapons of mass destruction, still not found. There's a lot of things that are going on overseas, and Muslims feel, anyone would feel, if their community, their religious community on the other side of the world.
But Abu Issa, what's Boko Haram got to do with Iraq and Afghanistan? They're going around, kidnapping schoolgirls, murdering civilians, cleaning out, ethnically cleansing whole villages.
Boko Haram has nothing to do with Islam. If this is the truth, what they do, and it's always been a propaganda war, and the West is known for this back in the World War, so God knows best what is the reality, but Islam is against vast majority of the acts that are being shown in the media. Islam is against that, and nobody has an opinion on this.
But my point is, you can't blame the West for everything, Abu Issa. And the problem is is that a lot, from a defensive point of view, you hear a lot of people, and all they seem to say is, "Oh, it's the West's fault. It's the West's fault." Can you not just admit that there are some Muslims out there who have a very different reading of the Quran to you, and they're evil people, and they use their evil and they try and find justification for it?
But if you look at when all these situations of killing, suicide bombings, when all this radicalization started happening, it started mainly, it arose at the time when the West is going to attack Muslim countries. So people retaliating. I'm not saying it's right. I disagree with
but that has nothing to do with Boko Haram, does it, for instance?
John exists. If Jihadi John exists...
That has nothing to do with what happened in Darfur, for instance. I mean, that has nothing to do with certain areas. And like I said, you know, look, the Nairobi embassy bombings happened in 1998. You know, that was before
I'm talking
the war
about
in Afghanistan.
When there was a rise of radicalization, which has happened since September the 11th. A lot of people have been harassed. Some people have been pushed to radicalization. And I'm not saying what they are doing is correct.
No.
I mean, they are being pushed. They feel like we don't belong here anymore. We've got to find a place somewhere else. And in the process, they've been approached by people who are radicals, and they find something. They find some sort of comfort in this, which it beats me, to be honest with you. The texts are very clear, and people need to understand these texts. Yeah, we can, like we had the gentleman from Salford being beheaded, and he helped the charity. If this is true, this is very extreme. This is not. I cannot.
But what do you think, Abu Issa? Can I ask you, because when I interviewed an academic about this, he wasn't particularly clear in what the security services can do, because of course, Abu Issa, as you know, if they set off a bomb in a train in Birmingham, they'll kill Muslims as well, won't they? They don't really care. So the security services job is to stop these people, these extremists, from destroying our way of life, and they have to go to quite considerable lengths to be able to do that, don't they? So what can they do alternatively to what they're doing now? Of course you feel harassed, and I can completely understand how angry you must have felt as an innocent human being to be harassed by the security services like this. But it's some way, it's like when I flew to Israel once, right? And I got harassed. I got taken into a small room. I got searched. I was there for an hour or so. I'd take my shoes off, etc. But I understood why they were doing it. It just meant that when I got on that plane, I actually felt a lot safer. Now, of course, that was only an hour and a half of my life, not 6 months or a year or 2 years of my life. So I understand it.
But you've got to look at Cage, and how many of those people that they're helping have been kept in custody, who are in prison without trial, without any proofs. And they've been there long, and this affects people. It affects families. You being subject to a search for 1.5 hours is nothing.
I've been stopped and searched by police before when I've had a bag. I've been stopped and searched in public, and it's a humiliating experience. But I didn't think that didn't make me hate the British state. That made me think to myself, well, you know what? It's unfortunate, it's uncomfortable, it's humiliating. But if it ever caught someone, then it's worth it if it saves one life. I mean, interesting you talk about Cage. I spoke to someone from Cage earlier on, and he mentioned Michael Adebolajo, who came to Cage and was crying and was upset because he'd been harassed. Now, this is a man whose kind of entry point into Islam was through the extremist cleric Omar Bakri Mohammed, who's a man who's now banned from this country.
Well, what was he expecting there from the services then? If he was not going to get harassed, al-Muhajirun. What was he expecting?
What do you mean? What was Michael Adebolajo expecting?
If you're hanging around,
yes, exactly. That's my point.
Then that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
You've got to face the facts then.
So you have no sympathy for people who hang around with people like Omar Bakri Mohammed and get harassed by the security services?
It's not about sympathy. I'll say you are asking for trouble then.
Right.
Literally.
Can I ask you now, Abu Issa, without mentioning names, have you been in any contact with the security services since, or have they stopped harassing you now?
They never bothered me after that.
Right. That's a very interesting thing you said, though, that you record. So you would encourage anyone who is wrongly harassed by the security services to record every phone call?
Yes, the best thing to do is record, and you've got evidence to scare them off, I believe. But then again, I wasn't a person that they suspected of any involvement in terrorism, but they felt like I could be a recruit for them to help them.
Okay.
Spy on the people. So, if I was harassed regularly, it would drive me pretty mad, to be honest with you, because he was doing it at very odd times of the day, you see. And I've made it straight, I'm very straightforward. I said, listen, don't bother me again. If you do, it's not going to be very good for you. And this is what I've done, and I will expose you.
Okay, Abu Issa, thank you very much indeed for sharing that with us, my friend. Amrik got in contact with the show. After that, we've got Fahad, and then we've got Sandeep in Nuneaton. Amrik, good morning.
Hello, good morning, brother. How are you doing?
I'm good, sir. Do you think that the UK authorities are to blame for the radicalisation of Jihadi John?
Well, I don't think so, because the thing is, Nihal, it's as simple as that, right? Okay. If somebody is stopped, and I know it's not a very nice thing to happen with yourself, people have, a different feeling with that. But at the end of the day, that's security services' job is to prevent terrorism and everything to happen here. I mean, look at one example, right? We have got every single same rules and rights of every single British people here, And I mean, there are some cases when people are, treated differently and all that. But then again, people talk about torture and everything else. What are these terrorists are doing they're blowing things up, killing children, women, doing every single bad thing in the world. And then they talk about, this torture stuff. The thing is, people don't know what torture is. If they want to know the torture, they need to look at, back home in India, Pakistan, and, all the other countries, people won't even dare, talk about it rather than coming on the radio and having an open debate about it. We should be lucky that, we are allowed to do this here. And then, if security services are not going to prevent terrorism and all the other bad stuff, then what are they supposed to do? They don't want to, welcome a terrorist in their office. Oh, come here, have a cup of tea with us. Tell us what you do. No, sometimes we live in a very hostile and volatile world, and sometimes, you have to use this method to get information out and to save and protect public. That's my view.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that view, Amrik. Farhat Hussein is on the line. Farhat, hello.
Afternoon.
What do you think? Do you think Cage have a point?
Cage do have a point, but I think reading from the newspapers and all the information, I think he was on that way. He was on that way to radicalisation, and what the security service did was just pushed him further into that quagmire, into that area.
So he was on the path to radicalisation. That's why they picked on him, and of course we don't know that for certain. Cage is describing him as a beautiful young man who was humble and wouldn't hurt a fly.
Yeah, I think he was on that way, and that's why the security services hold on to him.
But is it counterproductive, do you think, this kind of quote-unquote harassment? Because that's what our assistant professor in counter-terrorism was saying, that he believed it was.
Yeah, I think it is. It is counterproductive, because then if you keep on pushing someone to a certain point, they're going to fight back. They're going to say, look, I've had enough. I don't want to cooperate with you. I don't like the way you talk to me. I don't like the way you speak to me. So why should I help you?
But this is I can imagine how terrifying it must be to feel as though the power of the state is against you and you're just an individual.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like David and Goliath, it's just like when you're being bullied, you keep on getting bullied, they say, look, I don't want any trouble, then suddenly you just snap, and then you just lash out, and then anything can happen. So I think the question should be answered about the security services, because it's a good checks and balances to make sure that what they're doing is right and what they're doing is wrong. Obviously, we had reports from America that CIA and MI5 were involved in torture. Now MPs and politicians will be asking why has this happened? And I think it was a couple of months ago, Mozambique was in prison, and he was released without a charge. And that's from the security services as well. So questions have to be answered. Questions have to be asked. Why they're doing this? Is it counterproductive? For what reason are they being so aggressive?
Okay, Farhat, we're going to leave it there. But Farhat, thank you. Lastly, Sandeep is in Nuneaton. Sandeep, hello.
Yeah, hi, hello, hi.
What would you like to say, Sandeep?
I'd like to say that blaming or appropriating such terrible acts of jihadists to something that is suffered from the Britain or from the Western world, I think it's deflecting the issue completely. You see, Muslims are not the only minorities in the UK. There are Hindus, there are Sikhs, and there are so many other ethnic origin people.
Sorry. The Americans are not. The Americans have not invaded any Hindu countries. There's only one Hindu country, to the best of my knowledge, isn't there? Or maybe, well, the main Hindu country. They certainly haven't invaded India. They haven't done any drone strikes, extrajudicial killings in any of those countries, in India specifically. So you can understand, can you not, why some Muslims will say West has interfered in the West, in the East, in the Middle East, and you can also say, of course, the horror that was unleashed in Iraq, would that have happened? Would the Sunnis and Shias effectively gone to war with each other if the West hadn't interfered in that region?
Well, if you look at the history of Islam, I think there's a basic problem with Islam religion as such, in which, what is the declared motive of ISIS? The declared motive of ISIS is that we have to have the world converted to Islam. That is the declared motive. And if we are overlooking that motive and, looking for some...
Well, how is that any different to Christianity? I mean, look, the world, the reason that there are so many Christians in India is because of colonization.
Yeah, but you see, Islam has got a much more radical motive. No, in Christianity, they don't enforce this in a brutal way, at least. I mean, they are missionaries.
They did? Yeah. My gosh, are you kidding me? Look what they did. Look what the Catholics did across South America. In a brutal fashion, they converted and murdered the indigenous peoples.
Yeah, but
look at the Crusades.
It's not happening in the present civilized world. What Islam is doing is, the ISIS form of Islam is enforcing its religion. You said they have a very declared religious motive, and to find excuses like, somebody not treat me nicely, I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous explanation. People from all other, Hindus quite much look like Muslims. They suffer almost the same discrimination, if it was any discrimination in Britain, but they don't take the weapons, they don't kill people like in the streets and things like that. I think there's a problem with Islam. The Islam has got a clear motive. There are 2 or 3 parts of Islam. I don't know whether...
You see, Sandeep, I mean, look, Sandeep, we're kind of... The thing is, you clearly don't like Islam very much, and that is that's colouring your views of this. But Sandeep, there are millions of Muslims around the world who utterly deplore what ISIS is doing. They hate it. They say it has no part in their faith. It has no justification. In fact, the foremost seat of Sunni learning in the Middle East, actually in the world, is in Cairo, the Al-Azhar University, and that has said, now that's the supreme seat of Sunni learning in the world, has said that ISIS and its actions have no justification in Islam whatsoever. So, actually, your arguments aren't valid in that respect, because Muslims themselves deplore.
No, you see, part of your argument is right, but actually you're ignoring millions of Muslims in countries like Pakistan, in Saudi, where millions of them believe that the world should be completely Muslim. And
yeah, I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that Muslims exist who believe that, but then there's Christians, I'm sure, who believe that as well.
So if you just listen me out, you see, parts of the world where they are in majority, yeah, they don't accept any other religions at all. So like in Saudi, they don't accept nationalities and they discriminate based on the religion. Is it not right?
That is very true. Yes, the Foreign Office advice says do not practice your religion openly in Saudi Arabia.
Other religions by Islam in parts where they're in majority. Yes,
but many Muslims regard Saudi and its Wahhabi form of Islam to be extreme, and they don't like it. And many British Muslims complain about the influence of Wahhabism on British Muslim thought and life as well. I mean, so there clearly are some issues. In the same way, Sandeep, that there are Hindus who have a great issue with Hindu fundamentalism. And those that believe that India should be purely Hindu and that Muslims and Christians should be driven out of India. And there are Hindus that believe that, aren't there, Sandeep?
Well, first of all, Hinduism is a completely different religion to Islam. There's a lot more tolerance in Hindus, as has been demonstrated if you read a bit of history.
Well, ask the victims of the Gujarat riots if they felt that.
Well, yes.
Ask the Sikhs in 1984 who were dragged out of their houses and murdered by Hindu mobs if they feel that.
And what did the Hindus in general think about it? Hindus in general thought that was...
And in general, Muslims believe that ISIS is an evil thing, Sandeep. So what's your point?
If you look at the Muslim religion, what happens is that if you take terrorism around the globe, and if you take the history, most of the terrorism that is happening in the world at present is guided by religion, Islam. For example, you were talking about Boko Haram. What it is? It's a religious fanatic group against Christians.
Okay, all right.
If you take Middle East, it's happening the same thing. They have a very clear ideology that they have to somehow enforce their view of Islam and convert. And, that's happened in Bangladesh and Pakistan as well. When independence happened, they have about 15% Hindu population in Pakistan. What happened to all of them? It's less than 1% now. So what they did, you guys completely ignored the brutality that Islam or the version of Islam has inflicted upon other religions. People were forced to convert into Islam, or they would have to lose their lives, or their women would be raped. And to ignore that and to have some sympathy of a silly argument given for some people who are so brutal that they would cut the heads of people, I think this is very, very, ignoring the main issue of what the problem with the religion is.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Sandeep. Thank you for your points. Nick in Bowman said, despite the array of reasons and excuses, there can be no justified reason for beheading a person. This is purely about the individual's intentions and the people who promote this type of action. The naivety of the Bush US government has led to formation of the Jihadi Johns. Bush fulfilled everything on bin Laden's wish list after he lit the match of 9/11. The Americans went for revenge and started to take out Al-Qaeda's enemies for them, thus lifting the lid on the extremists to fulfill their goals. Manny Sandu on Facebook said, nothing can excuse his actions. It's very easy to blame others. Oh, they said this to me and treated me like this, so I turned out like this. What happened to self-control and seeing right from wrong? If the authorities treated him wrongly, then why did he take innocent lives? What did they do to him? If it's the case they are from Britain, well, how about you target your own family who also live in Britain? Surely they've also wronged you somehow. It's easy to make others a scapegoat and not take responsibility. What a coward and a traitor to his religion and country. Sam says it's always a blame game, so blame the British security services. Now they made him kill people. Don't think so. He made his choices in what he wanted to do. Stop the blame game. Stop him killing. Nilu on Twitter said, when will Muslims stop burying their heads in the sand and accept responsibility? Enough of the blame game. Pedro on Twitter said, when will families and communities start taking responsibility and stop blaming the state? Harley said no, he was radicalised before they even spoke to him. What nonsense. Sean on Twitter said, surely religion is to blame for Jihadi John. No. Mo in Oldham said, I, as an Orthodox Sunni Muslim, blame the religious leaders and circle of friends of these so-called jihadis. They are clearly sold an ideology which they fully buy into, pack their bags and leave the UK to fight for various groups, while their families suffer the consequences, and while the mullah or mulvi is still in the UK, sleeping in a comfortable bed and claiming working tax credits. The whole Jihadi John is ridiculous. IS are responsible for murdering these people. If this weren't by the hands of Jihadi John, it would be Jihadi Jeff, James and so on. Stop trying to ruin the lives of their families and go and get the people who radicalised them in the first instance. Indy on Facebook said, this subject that others are to blame has started to really annoy me. Why should others, such as the government, raise your child correctly? The blame game starts and stops with the parents. They need to educate their own children on right and wrong and give them support through their lives, not just as mum or dad, but as friends. If children cannot talk to their parents openly about issues, they will turn to so-called friends, and this is where their lives can go in the wrong direction. And lastly, this anonymous email said, I don't think security services are to blame for this. It's the fault of extremist Islamic people. They have brought this on themselves. The security services are trying their best to prevent harm caused to the UK, like 7/7 or 9/11. People should be privileged. We've got a strong security system. If you look at the underlying view of callers, all they do is blame Western country or politics or blame someone to try to make them feel the victim. Okay.
Now, yes, of course, you could argue, as I'm sure you're going to, that American foreign policy predates that. That's why it happened. But these people are violent psychopaths who are looking for an excuse to destroy civilian lives and put suicide bombers in the middle of markets, destabilise areas, because they succeed on chaos, don't they? They feed on anarchy and chaos.
Sure, they do. But the question still goes back to what makes a violent psychopath? Why they weren't violent psychopaths before the Muslim world was destroyed? What made them?
The Muslim world hasn't been destroyed. Wait a minute. Muslims are more than happy to tell us all constantly that it's the fastest growing religion in the world. So clearly, it hasn't been destroyed.
No, that's a faith, and there's a difference between a geographical area and the people. I disagree that it's the fastest growing religion in the world, but okay, there you go, right? The fact of the matter is you can't deny, whether you like to or not, the fact that Palestine is currently being ethnically cleansed, Iraq completely destroyed, 1 million people dead, Afghanistan in tatters, Pakistan in almost a civil war, popped up dictators from Egypt to Uzbekistan. stop no, there's nothing wrong, everything's fine, the sun is shining. Muslims don't believe it. Muslims are taken to violence due to it. So we're either, going to talk about fairy stories, or we're going to talk about facts on the ground. The facts on the ground are our policies are creating terrorists. If we want to stop terrorism, stop the propaganda, and actually face up to the facts and say, what do we need to do to stop this?
Okay, thank you very much, Ashkar. Let's speak to Dr. Rizwan Sabir, who's Assistant Professor in Counter-Terrorism and Counterinsurgency at Edge Hill University. We've got Gurpreet on the line from Leicester, and also Kerry Bullivant from Cage. Dr. Sabir, good morning.
Morning.
You hear Ashkar Bukhari and his ilk's arguments constantly, I'm sure, that it all comes down to British, American, Western foreign policy. What is the counter-argument to that?
The counter-argument is that this is primarily driven either through religious doctrine or ideology. And of course, ideology is only useful when there is a conducive political environment. Otherwise, you're just dealing with a set of...
Are British security services to blame for Jihadi John? We now know a lot more about the masked Islamic State militant who's featured in those beheading videos. His name is Mohammed Emwazi from West London. He moved here from Kuwait when he was 6 and studied computing at Westminster University. What we've also heard is claims that he may have been driven to what he's done by his treatment at the hands of British security forces. According to lobby group Cage, he was questioned and harassed by MI5, who also tried to make him an informant. So how did this apparently humble, beautiful young man become one of the world's most wanted? Is there any excuse for what he's done in Syria? Can someone become so radicalized that they turn into a murderous psychopath? You tell me, after the news with Ushma Mystery.
Got something to say? Then say it. Nihal on BBC Asian Network.
Ushma, thank you very much indeed. Are British security services to blame for Jihadi John? We now know this man to be Mohammed Emwazi. He's on the front page of every newspaper this morning with lots of details about his life. The Islamic State militant, pictured in the videos of the beheadings of Western hostages, is a Kuwaiti-born Briton from West London. But what's also been revealed is details of the difficulties he faced with the security services in the UK. He was known to MI5 for at least 6 years, and they even tried to recruit him as an informer. So is this kind of treatment enough to make someone so radical? Do security services have to accept some responsibility for what he became? Or are there lots of factors at play here, and there's absolutely no excuse for his actions, whatever he has experienced? It's also claimed the harassment he faced from security services made him feel like the victim of injustice, as well as isolated and alienated. Can you empathise with that? Don't the authorities have to use all means possible to keep this country safe? And that means a softly approach just wouldn't work with these people. Or are we just looking to explain away his brutal actions, when really there is no explanation other than that he's a cold-blooded murderer? Do you think the security service is
nuts in the first place? But did something push them towards that?
So do you find then part of what Cage was saying yesterday slightly disingenuous? Because they seem to be putting the blame almost entirely on the security services and saying that it was them that radicalised him, whereas you are clearly pointing out that he was quite possibly radicalised, or, as you said, a nut job to begin with.
No, I don't think they were saying that.
Really?
No, I don't think they were. I think they were saying very simply that one of the factors that definitely need to be looked at was that the security service actions. At the end of the day, they
okay. Just to be very clear, on their website it says Jihadi John : radicalised by Britain.
Yes, and there's no doubt about it that it was radicalised by Britain foreign policy, and clearly one of the areas that the secondary area is
not radicalised by an extreme form of Islam that was sold to him that perverted the very central tenets of Islam to suit a political ideology, which is going to be destructive regardless of foreign policy.
Well, I've heard this argument a million times.
Well, I've heard yours a million times as well. That's why I put the point to you.
You're asking me again, so I'll answer.
Go on.
Right? So you can hear it 1,000,001 times. And this is the 1,000,001 time. I'll say it for those of your viewers who haven't heard it. It's simple as this. All the terrorists that have been arrested or have made videos after they've committed their terrorist attack and died in the process have said that the reason why they carry out these acts is due to government foreign policy destroying the Muslim world. Any community in the history of this world that have been attacked by an outside force, whether that be blacks, whether that be Indians, or whether that be whites, have taken to violence, whether that means women. Women in this country tried to blow up Parliament. The suffragettes tried to blow up Parliament because they felt they weren't getting the vote. And a massive difference in that and getting a civilization like Iraq, Palestine, and all the rest of it wiped off the face of the earth. So the fact of the matter is, violence is. But
this violence was happening. I mean, look, the attacks, as you well know, on the Nairobi embassy happened in '98. This was pre the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, wasn't it? So this has been happening for some time. Live on the BBC Asian Network. Get in contact with me this morning and tell me, do you think that British security services are to blame for the radicalisation of Jihadi John, as he was, of course, known in the newspapers up until Thursday, when an American newspaper revealed that his name was Mohammed Emwazi and he was from West London. Kuwaiti-born, came here when he was 6 years old. He was described as a beautiful young man by the man who runs the organisation CAGE, which is a lobbying organisation helping communities that have been affected by the war on terror. Before we speak to Kerry Bullivant, who is a representative from CAGE, let's speak to Ashgar Bukhari from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee. Good morning, Ashgar.
Good morning.
I don't think any of us would get a prize for guessing that you agree that the security services have to accept responsibility for this. Why?
Well, we don't know if they have to, but it's definitely one angle that we should be looking at. Just like we look at every single angle under the sun when looking at any reason why people take terrorism. If it had been a madrasa, for example, they would have been all over it like a rash. I've heard in the media all day yesterday and today, what university did he go to? What mosque did he go to? What radical preacher spoke to him? So they're looking for absolutely everything. But as soon as you mention the security services or government policy, then all of a sudden, no, it's nothing to do with that. It's just he's a mad guy, which more lends itself more to a cover-up or propaganda than it does to real analysis.
Why would he be on the security services radar, do you think, if he didn't have radical sympathies to begin with? And I mean, I'm not talking about just watching him, because there may be, hundreds, if not thousands of people currently being watched, but to the point at which they are actually having meetings with him, they are trying to get him to inform. I mean, that must mean surely that he was a person of considerable interest to them.
Yeah, he clearly was. But here's the real question. The real question isn't, was he a person of interest? The question is, what tips this person of interest, who was going to get married, who had a stable job from all accounts in Kuwait, turning into a complete nutcase? Clearly, partly, he must have been...
Could have stopped this if they'd taken a different approach. And then what different approach could they take? So ultimately, I'd like to know from you, do you think that British security services are to blame for Jihadi John? Or do you feel that that is a simple excuse? That it diverts attention away from his friends, his family, and the version of Islam he was sold? And while you say, yes, of course, the harassment could have led to him feeling isolated and alienated in the UK, that is not the same as being willing to cut someone's head off, which is what he seems more than willing to have done on a number of occasions. So, get in contact with me. Tell me what you think. Do you have some sympathy with this argument that the British security services have to accept some responsibility? This young man, Mohammed Emwazi, was willing to leave this country, go to Kuwait, get married, start a life and a family. But the British government stopped him from going. Why? Or would you say, well, he wouldn't have been on MI5's radar if he wasn't a radical, or at least had extreme sympathies in the first place? Give me a shout. Tell me what you think about this. Do you think the British security services should take the blame for the man who became Jihadi John? Or do you think that's a ridiculous idea? And that, in fact, he became radicalised because he had radical sympathies to begin with? And it's perhaps his environment, his neighbourhood, the people that he consorted with that radicalised him, not the British authorities.
81869 is the text number. You can send me a text right now. You can email me right now as well. Nihal@bbc.co.uk. Go onto our Facebook page, leave a post for me there, or you can tweet me at BBC Asian Network. But as I always say, it's called the phone-in show for a reason. So here's the phone number.
Call Nihal now on 08459 440
Good morning, it's 12 minutes past 10. You're listening to the phone-in show live.